President Biden's top military advisors should have predicted Afghanistan's imminent collapse and then offered their resignations if the commander-in-chief refused to modify his withdrawal plans, a former deputy commander told Fox News. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley and Central Command Head General Kenneth McKenzie had a responsibility to stand firm if they believed the fast-paced troop withdrawal would end in catastrophe, retired Marine Colonel Andrew Milburn told Fox News. Can you imagine if those 3 or even 2 out of 3 had offered their resignation? Milburn, a former Special Operations Central Deputy Commander, said. You don't think that might have caused the president to think twice? He argued that all 3 are products of a culture the military has fostered that favors leaders who are obedient, rather than principled freethinkers. I think they are products of a culture that has arisen within the U.S. military that simply does not encourage innovative thinking or creative thinking, Milburn, who spent 31 years in the military, told Fox News. That rewards perhaps obedience above all else. I think within our organizations, the Joint Force, we sadly have a culture that does not always see the most strong-willed creative thinkers rise to the top, he continued. It's a culture that I think is amiss. The ultimate sanction. To date, no one has been held accountable for failing to predict the Taliban's swift seizure of Kabul while U.S. citizens still inhabited the city. Milburn said the Afghan government's collapse should have been obvious. How are these 3 holding themselves responsible? I've seen all 3 of them during the 90-day period use that term, Milburn said of Austin, Milley and McKenzie. It's very difficult to explain exactly what that means if you continue in office, he added. Holding yourself responsible often is a prelude to resignation. Not always, but that's really the ultimate sanction. So, it is hard to take them seriously. Milburn said the trio has rendered their own words hollow. He pointed to a September 28 Senate Armed Services Committee hearing where Milley testified that he wouldn't resign because the service members in Kabul couldn't refuse their orders. The general said it would be unfair to abandon his duties while enlisted men couldn't. Milburn told Fox News that Milley's testimony showed that he didn't have a good understanding of his professional ethics and called his reasoning illogical. While explaining why he didn't resign, Milley also testified that the nation does not want generals figuring out what orders we are going to accept. He emphasized the importance of civilian control of the military. But Milburn said the American public's wishes aren't really the only arbiter of making that moral decision because his oath was to the Constitution. It's not necessarily what the American public would like, Milburn continued. It is what does he feel his duty to the Constitution is. Not to any particular person. Milley also testified that he only serves as an advisor to the president and that the commander-in-chief can choose to ignore his counsel. While Milburn agreed, he also said that if Austin and McKenzie gave the same advice, that a particular order could cause a catastrophe as bad as the Afghanistan withdrawal, wouldn't you make a firmer stand? That is the time to stand your ground and simply say, no boss. I'll give you my resignation, Milburn told Fox News. That should be our collective expectation of these people. Such a move wouldn't be unprecedented. James Mattis, former President Trump's first defense secretary, vacated his post after repeated disagreements with the commander-in-chief. You have a right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours, he wrote in his resignation letter. Milburn also argued that Biden's military leaders should have planned for the Taliban's immediate takeover, even if it was considered unlikely. No one really without any sense of foresight could say, Biden will yank the troops out and the Afghan government will not collapse, he told Fox News. Certainly as military planners, you always have some contingency plan, no matter how unlikely you think an event is to occur, Milburn added. If the events are going to be catastrophic, you plan for that. Ignoring the ramifications of any decision that you make or order that you pass, I suppose would come within that category of snafu, he said. Ultimately, uniformed leaders need to know when to stand against superiors to best serve the nation, Milburn argued. As a military professional, our duty isn't simply to follow orders, he told Fox News. There is a point where if we see something that is happening catastrophic to the institution, then doesn't our oath to the Constitution obligate us to take action? Yet McKenzie didn't act on a top Taliban leader's suggestion the U.S. take responsibility for security over all of Kabul during the evacuation, the four-star general testified during a September 29 House Armed Services Committee hearing. He said he was unsure if that offer was presented to Biden. The Taliban ultimately took point on securing the Kabul airport. An ISIS-K suicide bomber bypassed the Taliban's checkpoints and killed at least 170 Afghans and 13 U.S. service members.